Please take their seats so we can get started shortly.
The Winnebago County Board is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org.
If everyone can please take their seats so we can go ahead and reconvene. We had just finished the district attorney's budget, and on your itemized list, the next would be the clerk of courts. We did finish with the clerk of courts yesterday evening, so the next is the UW Oshkosh Fox Cities campus, starting on page 443. Executive Harris.
There are no employees with UW Fox Cities. As you remember, this is a two-year campus, although there is a four-year engineering degree available there. And to get a two-year campus, the state pays the payroll and operates the campus, but they need to have a local sponsor for the facilities, a government sponsor. And in the case of UWO Fox Cities, which used to be Fox Valley, there's two counties that support the infrastructure, Outagamie and Winnebago. And so the ongoing expense is relatively small, but we're involved whenever a capital project is done. And so there's no employees. Their budget is on page 440. And Martin Rudd is in the back of the room to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the UW Oshkosh Fox Cities campus budget? I see a couple call-ins. First, we'll start with Supervisor Snyder, followed by Supervisor Shorsey.
Mine isn't a question, but I'm kind of a cheerleader. I just want the board to look on page 445. It says that the tax levy is $148,624. Last night we were all applauding ourselves and patting ourselves on the back for $300,000 being spent for us 36 guys. When you think that $148,000, which is on the tax levy, results in over $22 million economic impact to the valley, I'd say that's a pretty good value.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Snyder. Next speaker, Supervisor Shorsey.
Mr. Chairman, my only question is, now that the UW system has merged, and I would be helpful, and I'm not saying necessarily for this budget period, but in general, if we heard from maybe the Chancellor about the strategy now for the combined campuses, and how does this campus fit in the long-term goal for education, higher education in the Valley. That would really help settle things in a lot of ways for us newcomers, or at least for me.
I think that's an appropriate question.
Please.
Good morning, Martin Rudd, Assistant Chancellor for the Access Campuses. I oversee the UW Oshkosh Fox Cities campus and the UW Oshkosh Fond du Lac campus for the Chancellor's office. I can have a stab at that question because one of the beauties about the joining that we've been through is the coming together of strategic effort. So earlier this year in March, the Provost's office put together a task force of people from the Oshkosh campus, the Fox Cities campus, and the Fond du Lac campus to reignite the strategic plan. Each campus had a strategic plan. UW Oshkosh, the Oshkosh campus, had put theirs on pause while we went about this joining process. As a result, in July, we passed the newly developed strategic plan, which combined the best elements of all three campuses into a single strategic plan, which is being rolled out this spring. this fall. Two important new pieces came as a result of that strategic planning. First of all, a rededication to the mission statement of the university that includes access and transfer. We call ourselves access campuses because we want to be the points of access in the Fox Cities and in Fond du Lac for people who want to begin their UW education. So we keep those names rather than a sort of pejorative name, branch campus, which makes us sound like satellite sites. We are not satellite sites. We are two of the three campuses of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. The second part is that the Fox Cities and the Fond du Lac campuses had operating strategic plans that were developed. In fact, I had helped develop the last one for the then Fox Valley campus in 2013. As you are aware, we've been through two significant changes, UW College's regionalization and now the UW system restructuring. So many parts of that strategic plan, especially the operational side, have simply been in limbo while we've got ourselves back together. So I would love for the Chancellor and myself, or the Chancellor and the Provost, to come in front of this board at some point next year and actually describe in detail how the plan works for all three. But I think suffice it to say that it's alive and well and relaunched. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Supervisor Shorsey. Next speaker, Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How has student enrollment been for this academic year? Has it gone up, gone down, stayed relatively the same?
Yep, so you might have seen that the news release put out by UW System included about a 2.6% drop overall for students in the UW system. For the Oshkosh campus, those figures were down about 3.4%. For the Fox Cities and the Fond du Lac campuses, somewhere around 20%, which is actually somewhat better than the drop that some of the other two-year campuses have seen. In addition, the Fox Cities campus has brought in 154 additional international students as part of our international recruitment, which will actually be expanding starting in the spring semester to all three campuses.
Thank you. I think that just the point I'm trying to highlight is, there is a problem across the state with enrollment declining in our UW system and in our other campuses, and it's just something we should keep in the back of our minds, as the years progress, just something to think about, as we take up more investment projects, just something to think about. But thank you so much.
I'll just add to that as well. Technical college enrollments were down. We're seeing this strong, continuing at the moment, strong school-to-work economy, which has been driven partially by the chambers of commerce, where $20, $22 an hour jobs are available for students straight out of school. At some point, the economy will turn, and we're positioning ourselves on two fronts. One, to look for, and we've already started this campaign, people that have some college but didn't complete college, to get them through degree programs, whichever, if it's a 2-year or a 4-year degree. And then the second one is to be ready when those adult students, specifically those between the ages of about 21 and 27, those that left school and went straight to work, when they're ready to come back to college. Good points. I'll just add to Tom Snyder's point as well. The latest UW system study indicates that for every $1 that's invested by the state in the university system, $23 are returned to the state economy.
Thank you. Anything further, Supervisor Wojciechowski?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Supervisor Norton.
Thank you. A couple quick questions. The goals and objectives for 2020 on 443. Someone refresh my memory. Have any of those projects have we passed and forwarded them on? And has our counterpart, Outagamie County, passed any of those projects too? That's my first question.
Quite hear it.
All the goals, the 6, I think, projects on the 2020 goals and objectives on page 443, have we as a board passed them, and has our counterpart, Outagamie County, passed them? That's my one question.
Yeah, so the projects that I brought in front of the last board were the South Parking Lot and the Child Care Center addition, including the safety basement for the Children's Center. So those are the two projects that I brought in front of this board last month and presented, and we expect to be in front of you again with some roof repair capital projects as possibly as soon as next month.
Okay, that's one question. And under capital, I know it's only just 50,000, and it does list the 3 different projects. Maybe, let me look here, on page 449. So, and that's what he's talking about. So the daycare upgrade and the parking lot upgrade would not be funded this year? I'm just curious about, someone answered it, yeah, I'm just curious. Sure.
The child care addition has been already approved by Outagamie County as well. We're waiting for early November to find out if they've done the south parking lot, and I believe they've already approved the roof repairs, and we're bringing that before you in November here. What you're looking at on page 449 is capital outlay. That is not capital projects.
Okay.
So the capital projects are separate monies that you've approved for me to bond for, and made also for the roof repairs. So this is just other non-capital project capital that they're spending.
Thank you, Finance Director, and thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Schneider.
Sorry to punch in again, but Mike, maybe I can clarify that. Yesterday at our UWO Fox Cities Campus Trustees meeting, we did talk with Outagamie County, and they are committed to the parking lot. It's already in their budget. There was some conversation about whether they were going to keep it there. As of yesterday, they're committed to do it, and they will probably pass their budget next Monday.
Thank you, Supervisor Snyder. Seeing no other call-ins, that will complete the UW Oshkosh Fox Cities campus budget. Thank you very much, Assistant Chancellor Ruud, for being here.
Thank you.
We'll move on down to the next budget, and that is the Sheriff and Jail Improvement Fund. I believe it starts on page 243.
The staffing levels for the Sheriff's Department will remain the same as last year at 203 full-time employees and 5 part-time employees for a total of 208. The summary of significant changes is on page 244. And as you can see, there's a very small increase in the overall levy for the department.
Okay, we'll open it up for questions on the Sheriff's budget and the Jail Improvement Fund. First, I see Supervisor Wojciechowski.
So I'm kind of bringing it back to the county executive had alluded to this earlier about asking, why our jail population has decreased. Maybe you can speak to that, please.
Sure. Well, probably the district attorney would be more versed in that area, but I'll actually give you some. I don't like statistics. I had a teacher that once told me, have 1 foot in the oven, 1 in the freezer, and you'd be fine. So I'm just going to use raw data. On August 27th of 2018, our net jail count, that does not include ES sanctions that we get paid for, was 335. On April 24th of 2019, it was 211. Substantial decrease. We have seen a slight increase, September 30th of 2019, 249. So we're down in the neighborhood of 80 inmates or so. Where are they? That was the question that I had. Where are they? What are we providing? And that's part of the concern that the county exec brought up about non-prosecution. It's kind of a deeper question. Now, our counts, we are able to actually rent a fair amount of bed space, so you'll see a substantial increase in our revenue area.
Thank you. So, as you said, the total revenues has gone up, jail population has gone down, and the levy has stayed pretty much the same. So how come expenses haven't really changed? Is there a reason for that?
Sure, it's still the same. So if we have the same amount of inmates, we're just being reimbursed for them. We do see the revenue go up, but we still have to pay for food, medical services, regardless of whether it's 220 inmates or 330 inmates. There's obviously an increase in the meal area and some other services that we provide, but nonetheless, the cost stays the same, typically.
Thank you. And then this is just kind of a different question maybe for the county exec, just when I was thinking about, we recently voted to change the coroner's position to one that's hired as opposed to elected. And this isn't nothing against the current sheriff. I'm wondering if it's possible to do the same for the sheriff's position. I'm just curious.
No, that's, the sheriff's position is in the state constitution.
Okay, so that's
It's a
something.
statutory,
Gotcha.
so that's determined by state law. We have no ability to change that, nor would I advocate for it if we could. But
Yeah, I was just wondering, just something curious about. So that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wojciechowski. Next speaker, Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Defferty.
Thank you. Someone told me yesterday, Sheriff, that you were giving a grant to Christian Ann Center, and my question is, I could not find it in the budget. So my other question would be, where is it in the budget? How much is it for? What other services or what are they doing for that grant? And is this a one-time grant, or has this been a grant that they've done for a number of years, or those are my questions, okay? And I totally support giving to them. I just have curious about what I asked about.
Yeah, it's in the detail of the budget. I'll let you know where it is and exactly how much it is. It's been a number of years. The supervisor's question or statement was monies that are given to the Christine Ann Center. That has been going on. It was prior to my tenure as sheriff, so more than 9 years. And it was, I believe, in someone else's budget, and it got moved to the sheriff's budget. Why, I don't know. I don't know the reasoning. It's $65,800.
Thank you, Sheriff Motz, and thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Defferty, followed by Supervisor Fari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one thing that I'm happy to see is that we're not setting aside another $1.3 million for a new dishwasher for the jail. That was a pretty expensive dishwasher. How is that coming along, by the way?
Did you say 1.3 million?
Yeah.
No, it was 200,000 was the final price. I don't know where you got 1.3 from, but we got a $50,000 grant. I believe that the total cost, which came out of the jail improvement fund, was a little over 100,000 to that fund. So it wasn't taxpayer, it wasn't on tax levy, and it is in and it is functional.
Okay. That yeah, I wanted you answered actually my next question. I wanted to know just exactly what the actual cost was, because it was put out for bid, so it sounds like it was around 200,000. So that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Defferty. Next speaker, Supervisor Fari, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question has been answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Fari. Next speaker, Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff Motz, could you give us an update on staffing at the jail and in the sheriff's department? It's been brought to our attention that staffing has been a big issue, trying to find competent people. I know from the last installation of new officers that I attended that we hire very highly qualified and very highly educated individuals for both the jail service and for on the road. Could you bring us up to date on some of the problems that you're facing, and if there's any way that we or the Human Resources Department can aid?
Well, we have 5 vacancies in our jail division that are deputy positions. The other positions are filled, the civilian positions. 4 are in background. The unfortunate thing is they may leave our agency and go to another agency, or we have had some, because the economy is so good, that they've left for different positions. This is not a Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 job, and once rationalization of that occurs, sometimes they leave. There are a lot of great things about working in law enforcement, and there are some detriments as well. So with that many deputies, which is, I believe, 69 or 70 in the jail, we're going to have some turnover. In dispatch, we have 4 vacancies, 3 in training. That's actually more critical because we only have 31 positions. So when we have that percentage of our workforce that even though they're in training, they're not filling a spot for us for 6 to 8 months. That's how long the training period is. We are full in the other divisions. So my bigger concern is our communication center. We're doing as much recruiting as we can. But again, it's not Monday through Friday. It's nights, weekends, holidays, a whole lot of stress at one time, and then some boredom, a whole lot of stress at one time, and it's a tough job. So we're doing what we can. We are much like any other sheriff's office in the state, with the communication center having vacancies and our jail having vacancies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker, Supervisor Gabbard, followed by Supervisor Lautenschlager.
Sheriff Motz, on page 244, line item Board of Prisoners, I'm assuming that's for you getting inmates from other counties. And if so, could you give me a synopsis of where you're getting most of your empty bed renters?
Sure.
Empty bed renters from, Outagamie, Calumet, just a percentage. And then up above, there's telephone for 20,000, so I'm assuming that's for those inmates to use the phone. And the other item is capital equipment, increase based on the marine unit replacement. Is that for a boat?
Yes, the jail bed space that we are renting. ES sanctions, which is probation, parole, inmates that are the state's responsibility, are the majority of those inmates that were paid the roughly $52 a day. That's the majority, but we also have some state contract inmates that are actually would be in the prison system, but they are spending their time with us. We do rent space to other counties, but most of it is through state inmates, either through ES sanctions or our contract with the state. The phone revenue, that is for the phone system, not just a cash revenue for us, but it's also to fund the system, which gives us the ability to block calls to, it's a very intricate system, so that the inmates aren't calling victims, they aren't calling co-defendants, those types of things, and we're able to listen to their phone calls, which is beneficial for investigative purposes. Your other question with the boat, yes, that is a marine unit. It is our largest marine unit that we use on Lake Winnebago. What we plan on doing is taking the revenues that we get from renting that space. We wouldn't make this purchase until August timeframe. We know that we've met that revenue mark. If we don't, we'll go another year with the current one, but we are starting to experience some maintenance issues. We haven't had real serious, but there have been some $1,000 repairs, and it has a lot of hours on it. Even though the boat itself might not be that old, and I don't remember the exact year, the amount of time that it gets used is substantial.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gabbard. Next speaker, Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I want to say is thank you. In all my years on the board here, I don't recall any negativity at the Sheriff's Department, the jail. There could have been, but I don't recall any. And it takes a good chief individual to have the right people working under him. And I just want to say thank you. I think you've done a remarkable job for all of Winnebago County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Seeing no other call-ins, that'll complete the Sheriff's Department budget.
Chairman, I would just like to add something,
Please.
just to explain to the board members some of the complexity of our relationship with the state. When someone who is a state prisoner is on probation and there's a violation, for years they were placed in the jail. And the state would promise a rate significantly below the going rate, maybe $40 a day. But they would pay for the inmates on probation holds out of a pool of money that they would set aside in each budget. And when they spread that pool over the prisoners on probation hold throughout the state, oftentimes there was insufficient funds in the pool to cover the promised rate. So they promised us below the market rate, and then when it came time to pay us, they paid us half of what they promised, pretty typically. Okay, they decided to change that, and they were going to pay us the promised rate, still a below market rate, but pay it to us on all the probation holds. And my understanding is this has been resolved now, and the sheriff can probably help me on how the story ends. But so they were going to pay us for all the probation holds, but at a below market rate. But then they decided that if the probation violation that put them in jail was something that the sheriff's office could legally place someone in jail for, that should be on our dime rather than ours. So if it was someone who came out of prison on drug charges, they violated by being caught with an illegal substance, they said, well, we're not going to pay you at all because you could have arrested them for that. So my understanding that's been worked out, and they now are paying us for the probation holds.
That has been resolved, and it really was regionally. Our regional office was looking at our probation holds differently than any other region in the state. So we saw about a 60% reduction in our revenue for probation holds from people in our community that were placed in our jail. That has since changed, and so if somebody has a dirty urinalysis, so they used, let's say, cocaine, our regional office said, no, we're not reimbursing because you could have charged that person with possession. Well, you can't charge a person with possession when it's inside their body. So we won that argument. They have since changed, and we're now back on mark, a little bit less than we have been historically, but certainly it's a fair amount of revenue source for us, as those inmates are really the state's responsibility.
And I only offered that story as a way of explaining how complicated the relationship is with the state. So are we ready to move on?
The Finance Director wants to speak.
And I just wanted to say, I looked up how much that dishwasher costs, and it was $148,000. So just to let you know. All right.
Thank you. Next up is the coroner on page 259. Coroner on page 259.
The department staffing for the coroner's office are a coroner and the part-time secretary. The coroner also, though, has deputies that are paid based on the amount of call time they cover and a per diem for when they actually go out on a call. And the summary of significant changes is on page 265.
Any questions for the coroner? Not seeing any questions. Supervisor Norton does not want to speak. He changed his mind. Okay, not seeing any. We'll move right on to emergency management. 271.
The staffing for emergency management is 2 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee, the same as 2019. The summary of significant changes is on page 277. And the emergency management director is in the back of the room.
Any questions on emergency management? First up is Supervisor Norton.
Yes, my question for you, Linda, is where would I find the cost for the maintaining all the emergency alarms around the county? And I ask that question because I want to point out to this county board that unlike Outagamie County, our neighbors to the north, we are not pulling back that maintenance. Their county executive have made a decision that they're going to make all the localities pay for the maintenance on those emergency sirens. And I think that shows how cheap or how little they are doing that. So that's a jump. Where would I find that on here, Linda? Can I ask that question?
The account number is 54029. We budget about $17,000 each year. That doesn't necessarily mean we will use all $17,000. That does not include the power costs to operate the sirens, but we have additional money in there because every 5 years we need to clean the head of the sirens, and that 5 years is coming up now, and it costs a little bit more because we have to hire out for that. So, yeah, it's about $17,000 approximately.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Gabbert, followed by Supervisor Byrne. Supervisor Gabbert?
Go for it, okay. Linda, I just have one quick question for you. In your 2020 goals and objective, number 15, of course, I will bring this up, complete the purchase of the new mobile command post. All I would like to know from you is who was the successful company on the RFP that was issued?
LDV out of Burlington, Wisconsin.
Okay. And the price?
$441,000.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Supervisor Gabbert. Supervisor Rubin.
Part of it was answered just now, because I want to know what the command post cost. And I also was wondering what the status of the old command post will be traded in. Is there any resale value to it as described in your presentation?
The old command post will be traded into LDV.
Was there any value to it?
$10,000.
Thank you, Supervisor Bruin. Any other questions? Not seeing any. We'll go right on then. Next is Airport, page 289.
The airport budget is slated for 8 full-time employees, for a total of 8 employees, the same as last year. However, I'm aware that an amendment is circulating to add an additional employee. The summary of significant changes is on page 291. And the levy in the budget as it stands today actually decreases, largely due to increased revenues from the EAA lease and some other revenues. And the airport director is in the back of the room.
Are there any questions? Not seeing any questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor
What's your
Albrecht.
position on the new position?
I'm of a divided mind on it. I believe the airport could use an additional person. I think it would be a good addition out there. My concern is I don't like taking recurring expenses out of reserves. That's like taking, paying more rent and using your savings account. The savings account can only be used once, but the new position presumably will be funded for the long term. But I think if the airport director can make the case, it could be taken for 1 year out of reserves and then would work its way in the budget. And as I did mention, that the levy has actually decreased in the budget as it stands today. So I gave you a mixed answer, I know.
I was going to say, you skirted the question.
Well, I'm definitely divided on it. I'm not sure how I would vote myself.
Thank you, Supervisor Albert. Supervisor Gabbard.
I'm putting the amendment through, and I have the 5 committee members signed off on it, but I would wonder if you would please give Jim a chance to explain what is going on with that. Since he is here, he can give you a good explanation of why we're asking for this. And it is only a 1 year out of the reserve funds.
Chanel?
Certainly, thank you, Supervisor Gabbard, and I do appreciate the county executive's comments. It's certainly not my intention with this new position, should it be granted, and the budget amendment, I think, comes right at the end of this session. It's certainly not my intention to fund this out of the airport's fund balance on a recurring basis. I have a number of things, and I'll probably save that until we discuss the amendment. I've got a number of things that, if they come to fruition, and a number of them I believe will, we will easily be able to fund this out of our operating budget in subsequent years. Simply put, if I'd put this in, and no reflection on the process, if I had put this in 2 months ago instead of bringing it as a budget amendment, it would simply just have most likely eaten up the additional levy that we're now reducing. Again, we've reduced our levy 2 years in a row. I think that's a very good year and a half of time that I've been here. They financially say that the airport is in a better position financially on an operating basis than we were a year and a half ago. The long-term goal is to reduce that levy to zero. However, that's a very long-term goal. So I'm happy to speak on any other aspect of the budget, but I'll save most of my comments on the amendment for when that's being discussed.
Are there any questions for Airport Manager? Not seeing any. We'll move right on. Next is Public Health, page 330.
The Public Health Department is budgeted for 38 full-time employees and 9 part-time employees. That's a net increase of 1 part-time employee. And the summary of significant changes are on page 331.
Mr. Gear is not here. Mr. County Executive, if you think we should wait for him.
I would.
Okay. I thought he was here, but we will pass that by and come back to it because he is not here. I apologize. We'll go to child support. Okay, she's here. Child support is 360, I believe.
339?
339, yes.
And the Child Support Department has 26 full-time employees budgeted for 2020, the same as 2019. The chart of significant changes is on page 343. And we are in the process of doing the job description and making the request for a director position for that department. And I see Mike Collard in the back that can address that position. So we're on child support enforcement. And because I saw you here, I thought I would bring up what the status is of getting the new director.
Well, the new director is in recruitment right now. The previous director has resigned, and Julie Mabry here has been the acting director for a period of time, and we are in now recruitment to fill the position on a permanent basis. Another issue that will be before the board soon is whether we have sufficient attorney staff, and that's something we've been carefully evaluating and didn't finish evaluating in time to get into the budget. So that's an issue that will be before you soon, because there's one other attorney position, and we've learned that that will not be adequate to cover the legal needs of the department and all the sorts of cases they've been doing, and we found some things we probably should be covering in court and haven't been, and so that'll be a big issue to come before you probably at the next meeting, based on where we are in that process.
And Julie Mabry is in the back and can probably help with questions, but there is one thing I want to bring up. In some past years, the reimbursements plus the incentive monies that child support received were sufficient to cover their entire budget. But in the most recent years, we had over-budgeted revenue, so that in the budgets, it appeared that that trend was going to continue. But in fact, the revenues did not meet the budgeted amounts. So a small amount of levy has been applied to the department. That's not surprising, because most of their expenses are reimbursed at a 66% rate. So it's a question of whether the additional incentives can be obtained to fill that gap. But if you have any questions, Julie's in the back of the room, and I'm sure she'd be glad to answer them.
Supervisor Wingren, followed by Supervisor Gabbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harris, as you know, the Judiciary Committee looked at these budgets and found what we thought was a problem. And last month, we did have a closed session. You were there, and Mary Ann was there, and Vicki was there, and we cleared it up. And I thought, to be proactive, you should maybe explain to the board briefly what the problem was and what the answer to it was.
Yeah, the problem was what I just described, that there had been this...
that the budget sessions in the past, we've always been told that the child support had a profit every year. Well, it turned out this, for the coming year, it was like a $220,000 deficit. And looking back, there was almost every year a deficit, but it was sort of, well, you explain that.
Yeah, I think there was several years in a row where the revenues were overestimated. And when you looked at the budget, when we're looking at this 2020 budget, the 2019 year is a budgeted amount as well. So they were over budgeting revenue, so you always had the prior year that looked like it was going to have a net positive return, no levy, and then the budget year would show the same thing. But in truth, the revenues didn't hold up. And then you combine that with some changes for reimbursements for medical expenses related to the births and some other policy changes. It is going to require some levy. And quite frankly, I think in any area where we receive significant federal revenues, we have to be prepared for the possibility that those revenues may change. And the reason I say that is I follow the debt numbers, and since the 1st of August, $900 billion of additional debt has been laid on at the federal level. And I have to think at some point something will have to change, and I don't think we can have a certainty that we won't be part of that change. But really, there has been recent change, and maybe Julie would like to address that, the change with regard to the medical expenses for delivery.
Sure, birthing cost expenses?
Yeah.
At the federal and state level, they have been doing a whole bunch of legislative changes, no longer allowing us to collect birth cost expenses. So basically, what that kind of looks like, there was a time period in 2017 where we couldn't do any of it at all, and now we can collect currently at the moment, but we still have lost any intact families being able to collect any of that. And what that has looked like for our budget historically is we get 15 cents back on every dollar collected to our county directly from those birthing expenses. So we still have a whole bunch of legislative committees at the state level that we are still going to the Capitol to kind of try and talk about this and see what we can do moving forward. But we do kind of have to start budgeting and planning without it. In addition, it's a separate issue, even though it's also related to birthing costs, so it gets confusing. The birthing costs always used to be federally matched. So every dollar we collected, we also pulled down $2 from the federal government, and that, effective about 2 or 3 months ago, was no longer allowed to be federally matched. So even if we are allowed in the future to collect birthing expenses, we're not going to be allowed to have it federally matched. So that, the state has committed to making us whole, all the counties whole, for the next biennium budget. It's about a $4 million cut to the state for child support, and they've committed to making that, but come, I believe, the 2021 budget, we won't be able to count that as revenue anymore either.
Thank you. Next speaker, Supervisor Gabbert, followed by Supervisor Norton.
This department bothers me because I understand what Mr. Harris is saying and what you're saying, Julie, but so a year ago at this time, we didn't know these things were happening. So I looked at last year's budget book and we were $50,000 in the surplus. So we've made a swing of 637.39%. And you said a couple months ago this all came down. Was it effective immediately? And so right now we're looking at this $296,000 deficit. That's disturbing to me. Usually when something comes down from a higher entity, there's a time frame. So are you saying we didn't know any of this was coming down and then it came down and there we sit and we're not going to get this money? Because this is horrendous to me for one department to have a 637% increase in 1 year in their budget. I understand what you're saying, but I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So to put this simply, you're saying some mandates came down from the federal and then the state got involved and they said, well, we're going to try to help you out here, but we can only help you so much, but we're taking other factors away, the 15 cents, the dollar. I guess I need a good explanation. I didn't hear half of what you said, so could you repeat it, please?
Sure.
I'll first call on the finance director to also
Sure, if you
answer
wouldn't
that
mind.
question.
I just want to make sure you don't have that confused. The state mandates haven't gone into effect yet, so that has nothing to do with these numbers. If you look on page 348, we show you the last 3 years of actuals, and you will note when it's the negative on the bottom line, that means we were giving them levy. So I went back and looked 7 years for the Judiciary Committee, and we found that every year that was happening. So basically, we were getting about $1.4 million in revenues every year, but the budget was 1.8 to 1.9. So the revenues were over budgeted, and no one was being held accountable for their revenues. We always hold everyone accountable for going over expenses, but we haven't been good in the past as looking at revenues, and I plan to have that changed.
So shame on us.
Yes.
Okay. It didn't happen all over 1 year. That's
Right.
what
We have not even felt the
because
effects.
that's the way I was reading this.
Right.
It had been an ongoing issue.
Right. So we have not felt the effects yet of what Julie's talking about.
Okay.
That'll be something we have to look at in the future, but we looked at what has really happened in the last 7 years, and Doug in my office, he does all the state reporting. We looked through this and audited it down to what wires we brought in, just to make sure there was nothing, and it was just, nobody was paying attention to the actuals, because you can say anything for budget, but we show you these actuals to show you what really happened as
And
well.
that's what I was reading, so I didn't think
Right.
it was a 1 year thing.
Right, right. So we have not felt those effects yet, and we're not sure what they are yet.
Okay, that answers my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Finance Director, and thank you, Supervisor Gabbert. Next speaker is Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Fari.
Thank you. Julie, I want to talk, you talked a little about the birth cost recovery program, or getting the cost back. Now, I believe the governor in his budget proposal made it where the fathers would not have to pay for any of the birth cost recovery. And I know the WCA steering committee went on. We had someone speak to it. I know you had come to the legislative committee, and I thought we passed some of the resolution. We may or may not. Let me ask you a couple questions. A, why did they do that? You gave a small answer to the Judiciary of Public Safety, but why did they not change it so that fathers would be responsible for the both costs? And then my second question, I know there's a repair bill that you sent me, SB something. Is that just for the recovery costs? Or is that to try to get some of those, get the birth cost recovery being paid from the fathers? And how much, if we don't get those birth costs recovery from the fathers, how much could that cost this county?
Sure. Okay, your first question on how did it originally stop? The history there is there was essentially a group of gentlemen that were being charged birth costs that didn't like the fact that they were being charged birthing costs. So they created a group and called themselves ABC for Health. And they started going to all the legislators up at, the Capitol and complaining and saying all kinds of, false accusations about birthing costs, that it was leading to infant mortality rate because women were afraid to go get prenatal care and a whole bunch of things. And I think the Child Support WCSEA found them, like their accusations so atrocious they didn't really act on it. Well, then people at the legislation listened. And so then all of a sudden it was almost like it was done. And then once we kind of got wind of that, this is the history back in 2017, WCSEA, then we hired our own legislative advisor, and we've been ever since kind of going into the Capitol. I've been there once there myself. And then, they do ask, they've created now child support days where we go and meet with everyone we possibly can in one day to try and get these things sort of reversed. So the bill that I sent you is the reversal proposal to reverse what they have done. So that's what it was that you were looking at.
And how much do you think that approximately could cost this county if they do not reverse it? And how does it cost? Maybe that's another question.
Okay, so in running my numbers and what I found originally with the birthing cost for child support, it would be $175,000 a year that we would lose if we weren't allowed to charge any birthing costs at all. So if we are still allowed to charge intact families, that will be less than $175,000. However, it still will be, I haven't rerun numbers since I found out that it's not federally matchable. So there still will be a loss either way. But I don't know exactly how much it will be without the federal match.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Farley, followed by Supervisor Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure how to pose the question, but based on this 637% levy increase, and obviously they did not decrease employees to help offset that, you're telling us as county exec you feel this should be sustainable at that employee level?
Yes, because if you reduce employees, and you may also lose reimbursements related to their work. So you
normally you offset your levy by
but I
either
think
raising taxes or decreasing employees.
right.
That's
But
the way it
we're under an obligation to perform the service.
Mm-hmm.
And if we reduce employment, we lose a substantial amount of revenue as well. And just, I mean, you are correct, there's a shortfall here when we weren't used to having to put county money into child support enforcement.
If I might inject, originally it was supposed to be self-sustaining, correct? Wasn't that the concept years ago?
It was, because we were doing very well on the incentive monies,
Yes,
and we were getting the 66% reimbursement, including when services were provided from, like, let's say, corporate counsel's office. There'd be a 66% reimbursement on that. So they were managing to get, between incentives and the reimbursement, recover the money. But that actually ended several years ago, and there's just been a pattern of us overestimating the revenues. But just, again, to put it in perspective, you've got a department with $1.8 million in total expenditures, and the levy that we're budgeting for the county to pay is $296,000. So while we are contributing
15% or something like that.
Yeah, the overwhelming bulk of the money is coming from federal and state sources. But I can't guarantee you that that will continue at the current level.
That was my next question, yeah.
Yeah, I have, I get heartburn when I think about what could happen in federal reimbursements.
So, I guess this is yet to be determined in future years. Would that be a logical? Okay.
I think that's correct, but we definitely have an obligation to help custodial parents recover from the non-custodial biological parent.
Yeah. It's just an issue of, because if you look at your employment, went from 24 to 26, discussion about an attorney or something. So I think that needs close evaluation, perhaps.
Yeah, but clearly there's been a significant trend over the decades that there's a lot of non-custodial parents. So the demand for services is great. And Julie probably can give a better explanation or more information.
Yeah, well, I know child support is unique in a department in the fact that it's the only department in any county that's actually federally required. So if someone is on some type of state benefit, it is a federal requirement that we provide child support services. So another problem over the last couple of years that some of our incentive funds have gone down is because our performance measures have also gone down because of employee turnover rate and not being able to keep up with our caseloads as is right now. So the more staff we cut, entertaining that type of idea, the more money we're going to lose coming in for this department as well. Because that comes off of our total budget, because our incentive funds, we get 100% of. So whatever is coming into us for our performance measures, that goes straight into our budget 100% right off the top, and all of our expenditures after that are reimbursed by the federal government at 66%. And I know they do reimburse us the 66% because they require us to run the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Fari. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht, followed by Supervisor Smith.
Well, seeing the public health director isn't available, maybe we could have their finance director be here to stay on schedule.
The health director's in the back of the room.
Oh, okay.
He just walked in, so. Anything else, Supervisor Albrecht?
That's it.
Thank you. Next speaker, Supervisor Smith, followed by Supervisor Lawton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things in child support that I see that's kind of disturbing in some cases, you get some long-term divorce cases where the parties have been separated for several years before divorce. And I see that the judges are ruling in many of these cases as forgiving past child support. Are you working with the courts to any degree to stop this from happening?
Honestly, at this point, I haven't. And it would depend on each individual case. If there were not state benefits provided, it's not required at that point either. And then it is allowed to do that, to not backdate it to the date of filing.
Yeah, and I think that's what it amounts to. They're not state benefits or limited amount, maybe food stamps or something. But yeah, I see that there seems to be more and more. I've seen it from other counties as well as Winnebago, and that the idea of these long-term divorces, like I said, where they've been separated for a number of years, and then there's child support. I saw in one case $23,000 in back child support.
Sure.
And the court just dismissed it on a divorce. And I'm going, okay, who pays that?
Yeah, it would just be zeroed out at that point.
Thank you, Supervisor Smith. Next speaker, Supervisor Lautenschlager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got to ask this question. I mean, if this has been going on for several years, so what happened to the department head of that department?
She's left our employment.
Thank you, Supervisor Lautenschlager.
But I would, that would be a little deceptive if I left you to think that it had to do strictly with that issue. It did not.
Thank you. Next speaker, Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go out on a limb right now. I feel it's my obligation on this county board to fulfill the needs of the children of Winnebago County. So if we have to spend a couple more dollars for childcare, I do not have a problem with it. I would have a problem if they're taking advantage of me. And so far, I haven't seen or heard this. So I am for doing whatever we can to help our children of Winnebago County. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Seeing no other call-ins, that will conclude the Child Support Department. Thank you very much for being here this morning. We'll move on down, well, we'll actually move back up to Public Health. So that starts on page 322.
The department staffing for public health is 38 full-time workers and 9 part-time workers for a total of 47, a net increase of 1 part-time worker over the prior year. There's a summary of the significant changes on page 331.
We'll open it up for questions for the public health budget. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the next budget, and that is the Human Services budget. And that starts on page 360. And the table of organizations page starts on page 375.
The department staffing levels for human services is 263 full-time positions for 2020 and 24 part-time positions. That's a net increase of 1 full-time and 1 part-time position. And the summary of significant changes is on page 376. Dr. Topel, the Director of Human Services, is in the back of the room and can answer questions. I want to point out that Human Services is our largest expenditure, but not our largest consumer of levy, because once again, federal and some state dollars are involved in supporting their programming.
Very good. So we'll open it up for questions in the Human Services budget. Any questions? I'll first call on Supervisor Dufferding, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, since you're in front of the county board, just wanted to get an update on the crisis center and how the transition is going.
Yeah, excuse me. The crisis center is what we are finishing the build on between Parkview and the Coughlin Center. I had an update with Mike Elder a couple weeks ago. He said that it is largely on schedule, which is great. We were hoping to get in and ready to go before the end of the year, depending on the weather. Of course, you saw what happened this morning. Depending on the weather, it may be delayed slightly into the very first couple of weeks of January, but Mike is very happy with the builders being able to stick to the schedule. So we're right now in the process of purchasing all of the appliances and other equipment. We're planning on bringing over a good share of the beds, the tables, all of the things that we had at the other 2 facilities. We're planning on bringing over to the new center. We're not trying to have everything be new. We're trying to use what is still usable and good. And we're also going to be relocating some of my daytime and nighttime crisis staff that are in the community and doing things. They're going to have offices at that new center as well, which we think is also going to be good to have them be with the clientele that's there. So our operational goal is to get in and operational completely by the end of the year. Right now, I would say maybe the first 2 weeks of January might be a delay, but we're still looking really good for getting going.
And one last question, just in regards to the crisis center, explain to me the connection with the people that will be working at the crisis center and their connections to other people within human services in the county and what other and the services that they provide.
Okay, so just a quick review. It's a 16-bed facility for what we call hospital diversion. So if a person in the past, if they had some symptoms of thoughts of suicide, or they had some delusional or psychotic thinking, that the only choice years ago was to send everyone to the hospital. And I know that County Executive Harris said, and accurately so, that our cost now to send folks to Winnebago Mental Health Institute is going to be about $1,200 a day next year. So the only choice a few years ago was to send everyone there. And what our goal in crisis diversion is to try to divert approximately 50% of those people who would have just gone to those hospital settings, to have them be at our centers where they will have 24/7 supervision. The cost is much lower to us as the county, and we can also generate Medicaid revenue from seeing them there at our facility. So we get the benefit of lower costs, and we can generate more revenue. So that's why we're doing it, and you all agreed to that, and thank you very much, because it's going to be great. The other part that I mentioned was that our on-call staff for crisis, these are people that call us during the day or at night, and they're needing us to talk with them. They're needing us to provide some information and referral. They may need to help them with some ideas on how to calm the situation down at home. So there's multiple staff during the day and at night that are mobile, that they can go out and meet people where they are. We can go out and meet people at hospitals. We can go out and meet people at sheriff or police departments if necessary. We can meet them at their homes. So that group of staff, and we also have a call-in center where people who call, they call directly to our number, and that number is staffed and will be staffed at that crisis center as well. So we've really consolidated things and made things more efficient. And so those staff will all be located there at the crisis center, which is why we call it the crisis center, because it is a center of a multiple operations for mental health and substance abuse diversion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Dufferty. Next speaker, Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the privilege of working through 12 previous budgets with colleagues and as an observer of the budget process. And I've always attempted to contribute to that process. One of the experiences we've had recently has been a committee review of the Child Support Department. And of course, you've heard from Child Support just this morning. And what we found in committee was either budgeting deception or incompetence, where the director overestimated revenue, leaving a surplus. But subsequent review exposed years of expenses requiring levy dollars. For years, the Human Services Department, with their large budget, has been given a pass, just as some of the departments have been given a pass because you didn't discuss anything about public health, or you didn't discuss anything about finance or whatever. But in the process, I took a hard look at human services. I've attended probably 10 years of annual human services budget hearings. And I found it very enlightening, and the human services board members very involved. But when I started looking at the process of why there was a problem in support, I found out, and I believe that each of the supervisors, the county board chair, the executive, and Dr. Topol should have a copy of what I researched and what I concluded, and the action that I will ask for in an amendment. Basically, I'm going to ask that the Human Services budget levy be reduced by $240,000. And to get to the point, in order to match the adopted budget and to see what the actual budget levy was, you've got to check 2 years, because in 2018, there was a estimated amount of money needed and expenses. And in 2020 is when the actual amounts become published and accessed to part-time supervisors to digest and understand. I reconciled the levy for Human Services Department division for 9 years. In other words, I looked at the budget of 2020 and I saw what the actual levy was in 2018. And I saw what the actual expenses were in 2018 and 2020, the actual levy and the actual expenses. And I found that over those 9 years, the Human Services Department's adopted amount exceeded their actual levy by over $1 million a year. In other words, they come to us, Dr. Topol or the director of the department comes to us and asks us for $18,073,374. They did that in 2018, and we provided that amount of levy. But in 2020, when the actual amount is published, it turned out to be only $15,690.88 was needed. In other words, we overfunded the levy for that department by $2,382,686. Well, that happened in 2017. 2017, the adopted levy was $18,073,374, which is the identical as 2018. But in that year, the actual levy used was $14,441,683. We overfunded that by $3,631,691. And this goes on year after year after year since 2010. And if I could go back to the old accounting system that we had, and I can pull out that information, it's probably the same going back. So what I'm saying is that there's a disconnect from what the Human Services Department is asking in levy and what they actually needed, because those surpluses are spent someplace else, or they're put into excess overage. Well, I went further, because if you want to make an adjustment, you have to really get down to a particular account. You have to say, one thing I've learned from my experience on the board is you just can't say, well, I want to cut this by $240,000. You're going to say, where are you going to cut it? Well, I went down and I looked at the different departments within human services: administration, behavioral health, child welfare, economic support, long-term support services. And I tested them, and I tried to see which ones were overfunding. Someplace, if you got extra money, it has to come from someplace. It has to be something that was less than what you predicted it to be. Well, I looked at the 5 divisions, and I found that the child welfare service was the one that stood out to me as most overfunded by the levy. Now, just to give you a perspective of why I went in such detail with the human services, because I looked at all of the divisions. I looked at public safety, I looked at transportation, I looked at administration. I went back 5 years with administration to compare all the departments in administration, what they asked for in levy and what they actually had. What was the adopted, what was the actual? And for all of those departments, they were reasonable differences. Sometimes it was as much as 500,000, but those were small differences when I measured it against human services, which was over $1 million a year. Well, under child welfare for the last 3 years, revenue was asked at a sum of $3 million, and it came out $2.9 million. But expenses for 2018 that were adopted for child welfare was $14,261,004. But I measured that against what the actual expense was $12,619,146. So in other words, there was $1,642,058 less spent in child welfare than what was asked for 2 years before, because this was the first time that this information became available. And if you look at your copy of what I summed up, you can see that that's documented for 4 years of excess expenses. And then I looked at the different categories within the expenses. And I looked at the contractual services, which stood out as the most overfunded expense. And there, in 2018, we appropriated $7,472,551 for contractual services, but we only actually spent $5,866,515. There was $1,606,036 less expense in that category than there was asked for 2 years ago. And the same was for 2017 and 2016. Almost $1 million in 2016, $1.6 million for 2017. Well then, if I'm going to, I would say cut it down by $1 million, but I don't have the skills or the knowledge, and that's why I had said yesterday, maybe it'd be a good idea for the county board to have an auditor somebody who can watch these things, somebody who can look at the health insurance and interpret it for the board, someone representing the board, not representing the administration, and to advise us what's really going on in the departments. So what I identified was within the contractual services, account number 55046, group homes, I would reduce, well, I picked up $240,000 because I could identify areas where there was an expense that was requested. However, there was a column that said the year-to-date and also the expected amount for that category. And for 55046, if you were to follow through that in the budget, you'd see that there was about 400 and I should probably just find the page and
That's page 420. I do want to bring up just a little bit though right now. We're getting, and I hate to stop you in the middle here, Supervisor, but we're getting close to the timeline to give us enough time to be able to make it to the American Legion for the luncheon at noon. So it doesn't look like we'll be able to finish the human services budget if we're going to try to make it to the American Legion, because we all have to obviously drive there.
Well, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just sum this up, and I'd say that from what I have researched, it is deserving that we reduce the levy by the $240,000. I sent this information 2 days before the meeting, 3 days before the meeting, to the director, to the chairman, to the executive, so that this is not going to just come out of the air, come out of the cold. So if the director had read through this, and if the board is convinced that you need to reduce that levy because of all those 9 years of overstatements, then he can advise us where he can reduce it if he can't reduce those categories. But I put those there because it seemed illogical, and I'd be glad to address that after the lunch hour.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. And I know the Human Services Director will have some comments in regards to that, but given our timeline, I think we should make a motion to recess for our luncheon. Okay, and just so you know, there were 4 people who have punched in succession, so I've written their names down, so we won't lose track of who was next to speak once we come back. So we'll break for lunch once we vote on the recess. Approximately 1:15 or so, we'd be coming back here. The students then would be taking our seats, so to speak, and we'll give them a little bit of information and give them an opportunity to vote on a resolution so they get a feel of what we do here. It's approximately 1:15. Basically, when the American Legion luncheon ends, then we'll be coming back here. I would anticipate, based on prior years, approximately 1:15. So it's at 1332 Spruce Street. You're going to go north on Jackson. You're going to then turn left on West New York Street and then right onto Spruce Street. Yes. All right, there was a motion and second to recess. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are in recess. Thank you all.
The Winnebago County Board is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly.